1. This took place about 4 years ago. I was driving to my grandma's house, which is about an hour from my work. It's a pretty straight shot up the interstate, and while I usually took the back roads, it was getting kinda rainy, and I just wanted to go ahead and get there and get home. My car at the time was a beater station wagon that had a tendency to sorta overheat, but not really. It would just kinda stop working. This was usually when the gas tank was getting on the low side, but it wouldn't be actually out of gas. Usually, if I let it sit for a few minutes, it'd be fine. Anyhow, I'm heading to my grandma's house when the car starts its overheating, acting like crazy, about to shut off routine. I pulled over to the shoulder and cut the car off. I wait about 5 minutes just sitting there smoking a cigarette. I go to start it up and nothing. It wouldn't actually turn over. As the daughter of a well-versed car guy, I pop the hood. Not that I would actually be able to recognize exactly what was wrong, but I knew enough to at least rule some things out. I didn't notice anything major malfunctioning, so I start to make my game plan. At this point, I'm still about 40 minutes away from my destination. My dad is a good hour and a half from me, and I know if I go that route, there's bound to be a lecture I don't want. So I decide to call the roadside assistance number in my state. The dispatcher is very nice. Lets me know that a tech should be there in 30 minutes. So I start to settle in my car to wait while the rain sprinkles outside. After about 15 minutes or so, a car pulls in front of me. It's not the DOT guy. It's a stranger in a beat-up 80s Monte Carlo. He starts to walk to my car. Just so you know, I live in the South. It's not out of character for someone to stop and help you. Anyhow, I watch as the man approaches. He's tall, 6'3" or so, and built like he might work in manual labor. I roll the window down about 3 inches because it's raining and I don't know this person. He gets close to the window and asks if I need help. I thank him immediately, but let him know that, no, I'm good, and waiting for the DOT guy to show up. He says, I work on cars. Want me to take a look to see if it's a loose wire or something? I thought it was a nice offer because I'm a little too trusting, and say sure. I pop the hood and get out of the car to look with him. I know, stupid decision, but again, I'm pretty trusting. He fumbles around a little with various wires that are perfectly fine, making small talk about how he was coming from a local army base from visiting his daughter, and heading back to his home that's in the neighboring state, etc. I found it a little odd. I mean, it could have been legit, but he was wearing really dusty and dirty clothes, jeans with huge holes in the knees, and he just didn't look clean. Not that you would go to the base in your Sunday clothes, but the chances are you would have showered. So he starts saying, well, it doesn't look like your roadside assistance is coming. He said it almost accusingly, as if I had never called them and made that up when he first got to my car. Still being doe-eyed, I said, actually, he should be here any minute. That's when it got weird and my spidey sense finally started tingling. The rain is getting a little heavier by the minute. He looks at me, well, mostly at my boobs, and his energy, for lack of a better term, changes, and he offers to take me to the McDonald's off the next exit for a cup of coffee to get out of the rain. I thanked him for the offer, but said no thanks. He said, it's right up there, pointing about a quarter mile up the road. We'll be able to see the DOT guy. I thanked him again, and again declined, saying I'd be fine in my car, no biggie. He started to get more and more aggressive in his offer, saying things like, come on, it's right there. 1 cup, my treat. And, my daughter's a soldier, I wouldn't try anything weird on you. Just hop in the car and we'll go right there. Each time he says something, he moves a little closer to me. The little voice in your head that goes off kept saying, keep acting dumb, keep being polite, keep refusing. Get in your car and lock the door, you colossal moron. Finally, when I told him that I really appreciated his offer, but since I didn't know him from Adam, I just wasn't comfortable doing that. But how incredibly kind it was for him to stop and be so helpful, and that I really hoped he had a great day, he finally relented. I had been edging my way to my door as the rain hit its crescendo. Once in the safety of my car, I locked all the doors and watched him walk back to his car and drive away. Not 5 minutes later, the DOT tech arrives. He comes up to my passenger side window as the rain has pretty much returned to a light drizzle. I get out and tell him the story of the man and what transpired. He gets this horrified look on his face and says, "You do realize you would never have been heard from again if you'd gotten in that car." I explained that when the guy kept being pushy about it, the alarm bells finally sounded, and all I could think to do was continue to be polite but firm, so that he didn't get offended or angry, and snap and do God only knows what. He told me I should never have gotten out of the car and I should immediately thank my guardian angel. I did. I'm pretty certain I was a frog's hair from being found in a garbage bag. 2. I live in a small city and nothing much exciting happens here, especially in my neighborhood. It's pretty rare to even see a car pass by after 10 p.m. I'm a 21-year-old male and I spend most of my nights playing video games or reading when I'm home. I rent a 2-bedroom apartment under my parents' house with my sister and 3-year-old nephew. She doesn't stay home most nights, and my dad works 2 hours away from home, so I'm alone from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. generally. The first time I saw a flashlight guy was about a month and a half ago. As I said, the neighborhood I live in pretty much shuts down by 10, so it seemed odd in the first place when I went out to smoke and noticed a man dressed all in black, with his hood pulled up, walking down the street, but I brushed it off. My street's really dark, and my house is the last one on this end. From my house to the end of the street and around the next corner, you have to walk about the distance of a football field. I brushed off seeing flashlight guy and walked back inside. I went back into my room and started to read the newest Dean Koontz book I had just picked up at the library. It was only about 15 minutes later, after I went back inside, that I saw a flashlight beam sweep through my windows. One wall of my room is all windows. At this point I was pretty unnerved, so I put down my book and went to peek outside to see what was going on. When I looked out my window I didn't see anything, so I chalked it up to me being a sketch and sat back down to read. It wasn't long after that when it happened again. At this point I knew something weird was going on, and I had a really bad feeling in my stomach. I wanted to just ignore it, but I urged myself to be a man and look back out the window. Looking outside, I noticed the guy from earlier standing about 15 feet away and shining his flashlight directly in front of him. He wasn't even moving. I sat there for a couple of minutes, wondering what the hell he was doing, until he swept his flashlight across the whole downstairs of my house again. Like I said before, nobody was home and my car was in the garage, so because the whole house was dark and there were no cars outside, I'm sure it didn't take much for somebody to figure I was the only one there. I was really creeped out and I wasn't sure of what to do, so I went up the stairs and through the door that separates my apartment from my dad's and went to his room, loaded the shotgun. When I got back downstairs and looked out the window, the guy was gone. I was pretty creeped out and stayed up all night checking every 10 minutes to see if he had come back. So it's been about a month and a half, like I said. Since that time, this has happened twice. About once every couple of weeks, and he always does the same thing. Sweeps his light through and then just stands there like a creep. I've gotten to where I always sleep with my dad's shotgun next to my bed. My dad only says it's weird and tells me to stay inside when I see him, and to call the police if I feel threatened. Anybody that does that type of thing obviously doesn't have the best intentions, so I understandably do feel a little threatened more and more every time it has happened. Fast forward to 2 days ago. Once again, I'm home alone. My microwave broke, so I've been making it a habit to go upstairs and use the kitchen whenever I'm by myself. I forgot to mention that the only door to our apartment, besides going through the garage, is in my room. That's important. I made my food and went back downstairs. When I got into my room, it was freezing cold. I live in Vermont, so this time of year I always leave my door shut and locked, and put a towel under it. I use the garage to go in and out of the house because as soon as I open my door, all the heat goes out of my room. I set my foot down and checked to see if my heater was on high enough. I keep the heat cranked all winter because my room is the coldest in the entire house. When I looked at my thermostat, it was shut off. I turned it back up and was really freaked out because I had just turned it up about an hour ago. And like I said, it's never off because of how cold my room is. I felt a breeze on my back and turned around to find my door open part way. I shut it and locked the deadbolt real quick, but not before I peeked outside and, sure enough, saw flashlight guy's light go out as he turns the corner at the end of my road. The next day I told one of my neighbors about what happened, and they told me that just a couple weeks ago some woman that lives in the neighborhood was alone watching a movie with her daughter when somebody broke in. I guess they heard him come through the door and locked themselves in their bathroom, called the cops, and waited for them to get there. The guy must have taken off when he heard sirens because when the police got there the back door was wide open and nobody was in the house. I don't know who this guy is or what the hell he went into my room for, but at this point, as you could imagine, I'm really on edge about it. Since the other night, nothing more has happened, but I'll update if it does. I've been keeping a light on outside, and a couple throughout the house at night now, so it doesn't look like I'm the only one here at night from now on. I'm hoping this will be the last time that I see Flashlight Guy. Edit. My dad is setting up some security system tomorrow. I guess our cable company has some kind of surveillance system that he's getting. So hopefully that will be the end of all this. Three. Before I start, I'm Russian, so my English isn't that great, so if I confuse you guys with my sentences and grammar, I hope I can answer it better in the comments. I was struggling whether or not I would want to post this story, because I am still disturbed and shaken up to this day, ever since my experience with my uncle. I grew up in a wealthy family. Both of my parents had enough money ever since I was born to get into the best schools in Russia and all over the world, and during my earliest years, I remember going to many places during my summer breaks with my parents visiting so many places. And to this day, those are my fondest memories. My parents had steady jobs, and they were mostly happy. My father was never fond of my mother's family, except her parents. My mom had 2 siblings, a sister who passed away 2 years ago, and a brother. Both of these people didn't care about my mother, especially my uncle, and both of my grandparents from my mother's side weren't too fond of them either. My mother tried too hard pleasing them about everything, lending them money even though they would never pay their debts, among other things. My uncle, my mother's brother, really wanted to kick out both of my grandparents since he wanted their house, even though he already had a big house and that belonged to my mother after my grandparents died. He really wanted to get that house, but my grandfather was the owner of the property, so my uncle couldn't do anything. Both of my grandparents died in the same year. My grandfather died because his left side was completely paralyzed, and he was catatonic for a week before he woke up, and the last words to this day resonated deeply to me. He told my uncle that he will never get what he wanted because he was a greedy bastard before going back to that same state. couple of hours later, my grandfather passed away on that couch. My grandmother was one of the most sensitive, kind-hearted people I've ever met, and her health deteriorated really after my grandfather passed, and she died in the same year. My mother went from a very cheerful and hard-working woman and became really depressed and battled breast cancer the next year. Thankfully, she is alive to this day, but she is not the same as she was used to. My mother stopped going to work because she couldn't take the stress, and my father tried to help her as much as possible, but he couldn't. They tried to open up a business, but for some reason, they listened to my cousin, who is 17 years older than me, and knew a lot of people that could help us with the business. My father was hesitant at first, but my mother convinced him to do it. My father invested a shit ton of money for decorating and opening up the business, and sold all the other houses we had so that he could really pour all his effort into his business. My cousin was heavily involved and influenced my father in all his investments, from opening up and preparing the business. By the time he finally opened the business and started working on it, it's all we had in order to survive. I was in high school while my sister started going to college. Then the worst possible thing happened to my family. Our business didn't go as planned, and he closed down the shop. He tried selling the shop and the property to someone else, but he couldn't for the longest time. We were broke, and we put our house as mortgage to some loan shark for money. We couldn't go anywhere, and things were going pretty bad. I never told my friends or anyone else, because I was afraid they wouldn't hang out with me anymore for some reason. My uncle had my grandparents' house all to himself, and he didn't want us to come there and would ignore my mom's calls, even though, in my grandfather's will, it said the house belonged to my mother only. But my uncle put a fence so that no one could get in, and we were broke. We didn't have any money to even call some men to help us move there, and we couldn't sue my uncle because we had no money. My parents panicked, and the worst week in my entire life happened. We left our house, unable to pay back our loan, with most of the things now belonging to that loan shark. I spent a whole week homeless in the winter with my parents in the freezing cold. I spent at least 2 days at some friends' places, but I knew that they were uncomfortable with me and my family staying there for God knows how long. And I remember my friends' parents out loud told us we couldn't stay long. Those alone were the most painful days of my entire life, and I'm shaking as hell while I'm typing this. My mother tried to kill herself a couple of times, and I tried to stop her with my sis and father. My childhood best friend at the time, who is now my girlfriend by the name of Olga, was out from the country with her family, and there was no one at her home, so I couldn't contact her or anything like that. No one wanted to help my family until I got a call from Olga, and I remember I told her I need somewhere to stay. And I remember I have never cried and begged as much in my life at that point, to let me and my family in. I remember she agreed, and told me that she and her dad will come and help us move. At least 10 minutes pass, and I see her and her dad stopping at where we are at, helping us pack our bags and things we had in his car. But he had to go back and forth 3 times so that he could fit everything in his car. My father stayed there with the last of the bags until he hopped on also. Olga talked with her parents, and they let us stay as long as we wanted to. My parents were really depressed at that point, and they were just eating and sleeping those days. Olga's father had a close friend who was a lawyer, and he begged him to look into the case with my uncle and my grandparents' house. He agreed to look into the situation. Thankfully, I stayed at Olga's place for 6 months, and I remember we grew closer than ever before, and we started dating. We still are. During these 6 months, I continued high school and my sister continued college. Olga's parents were lending us money as much as they could, and I could never repay them for how much they helped me and my family. The lawyer, who was the close friend of Olga's father, told us that he will be able to give my grandparents' house to my mother. The judge decided that on behalf of my grandfather's will, My uncle ignored everything that was written there, and that he had to let us have the house. He was forced to give up the house, and we moved in there. Now you might think, this is where it gets better. Well, it doesn't, since my uncle tried every single moment to make us homeless again, but we had no proof. He hired some people to rob us while we were sleeping. Someone would throw a rock at our windows, etc. My grandparents' house was a more isolated place than some of the other houses, and not too many people were passing by our house. My sister was once almost assaulted by some men near our house, but thankfully she was able to get away. My father hired a private detective to monitor our house all day, with the help of Olga's father to catch my uncle. They photographed him breaking into our house, for some reason instead of hiring other people to break in. My parents were out, while me and my sis were at college that day. I started college at that point. We called the police and showed our pictures of him breaking in. He was charged for breaking and entering, among many other things, and he had to spend over 15 years in jail. My cousins and my aunt were trying to contact us, calling us the worst names possible, that we should have died in the freezing cold and that we will pay for everything we did. Ever since then, we haven't heard anything from them, and thank fucking God for that. Now that I finished college, I was able to open up a business with some friends of mine I met through college, and I'm starting to get some good money, though it's a far cry from what my parents had before. I hope I never meet and hear about my uncle and his family ever again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 162. Well, if you're listening to this, I hope your Christmas is going well. If you don't celebrate Christmas, then I hope you're having a nice Sunday. I would, of course, as always, like to say a very big thank yous to the individuals who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'm very appreciative of that, and if I'm a little late sending the email messages, I do apologize for that too, because I'm probably in a food coma right now if all goes according to plan. Just let you guys know that video uploads should be as normal this week, going right through to the new year. I'm not planning on taking any days off. Well, that's not true. I'm going to be taking days off, but I will have the videos done in advance. I like to keep my upload schedule as is, and there's really no reason I can't give up a day or two here or there just to make sure I can do that. Okay, and with that I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.